Hi, I'm Dr. Connie. I am your host on The Widow's Walk, and I'm going to begin this show with my monologue. This show is all about my monologue. It's about me again, and it's rather bittersweet because we are wrapping up our second season of The Widow's Walk. It's been very successful in so many ways, but we are completing it, and this will be our last show on Widow's Walk. So it's almost like I'm welcoming you to the show only to say farewell, but we're not going to be done yet. So the theme of this show is keep on walking and keep on talking and keep on breathing and living. So I welcome you to this show. And as I said, it's rather bittersweet. It's been 2 seasons, 2 years of this show. And I'm looking back in retrospect as to how this show began, and all the guests have been here in studio with us and in our private area for broadcasting, and how they've carried on the message of helping widows out there who have lost a loved one. And I look at this podcast as something about addressing the empty chair in the room, because we dedicate it to people who are no longer in this life with us. And they are forever with us. And I think that's the lesson we're learning, that those who we said goodbye, you never say goodbye completely because they're with you in some way. And if you believe in life after death, you'll see them again. You'll see them again. So as I said, I'm the guest this time. I began this podcast. It's been now 2 years, but I lost my husband, John, in 2019. And at the time I lost him, I thought I was done. I wanted to give up on podcasts, didn't want to do anymore. And actually, John was the one who got me started with podcasts. He gave me a Christmas gift to do a segment for Voice America on house calls. And that's what was his gift to me. And I really enjoyed it, and I continued. So that show is now in its 10th season. And then Widow's Walk was born after I lost John 3.5 years later. And I said, what I'm going through, I think others can benefit. And I always say, may my pain be somebody's gain. May what I've learned from my journey help somebody out there who's hurting. I really like to write. That's one of my passions whenever I have free time. And so one of the reasons that we're ending the show after the second season is so I can spend more time writing the book. And I'm going to name it The Widow's Walk. Now, where did I get the name The Widow's Walk? Well, if you look back to the seafaring days in America, the architectural design of some of those houses in New England, it's called The Widow's Walk at the top of the house along the roof. Usually have the image of a widow in black with a hat back in the 1800s, and she's looking out to sea, looking for a ship in which her husband's the seafaring captain, but he never comes home. She's a widow. So they call that the widow's walk. But I like that term primarily because the word walk. Because when you look at the journey of widows and what we go through, or anybody who's lost a loved one, it really is a walk in the sense that you don't run it, you don't sprint it. Some people it's a marathon. Some people you stumble and trip through that way. But you have to walk the walk. That nobody can do it for you. You can't delegate, you can't put it off. We all have our own timing. One of the things we learned from this show, that we all grieve in our own way. It's a very personal way. Just as our relationships and our marriages were very special in so many ways, widows grieve in their own way under their own timetable. You never tell somebody, oh, he's been gone for 5 years, you should be over this by now. No, that doesn't work for us. So we widows know that it really is a walk. It's a personal walk, that you can't delegate it, you can't hire someone to do it, and only you alone can do that. But you have to realize, too, that you're not alone in your walk. And when you look at the numbers, each year in this country, there are 700,000 wives who become widows, almost 1 million of them. They join this club that I always say that we never planned to join, we never wanted to join, and it's a big club. There are about 11 to 13 million members of this club. The average age of the first-time widow is 57. And then statistics about husbands and wives. I tell wives who are not happy in their marriages, well, just hang in there. Statistics show that you're going to outlive him for about 11 to 15 years. So see how long you can live. When you look at married American women, 58% of women over 75 and older become widows, compared to only 28% of men who lose their wives. And so the numbers favor more widows than widowers. So as this show evolved, I was blessed to have incredible guests. I met the most amazing women and several men who were involved in the widowhood journey. And half of them I knew personally years and years, including friends of John's. And then the other half I met in various places. It's almost like you become a widow magnet. You're a restaurant, you meet somebody, they go, oh, I'm a widow. You realize how many widows you know. I have them from my practice come on the show. I've met them at my hair salon, to other people. And there's just sort of a network of friends. And I call them the girls in the hood. And this is one of my favorite pictures that was taken, I think about around the time I was kicking off the show. And I call them the girls in the hood. And it's like the neighborhood, but it's really the widowhood. And they're all widows in this picture. The oldest one is about 88 now, and the youngest one's about 54. So we're an interesting group. The one who's been married the longest was married 60 years, and then I was the one who's married about 9 years in this picture. And they're probably our closest friends because they understand what it's like to weep, to lose somebody you love, and to have to go on with life again. So there is a group of people that you can turn to look for help. And I look at all the resources because as I became a widow, I looked at all the sources you can get help. Obviously, professional help. I'm in the medical field. I send people to psychologists, bereavement counselors, therapists, psychiatrists. Fortunately, none of my patients have been suicidal, but there's always someone to help you if you're willing and wanting and open to have someone help you. If you're a member of a church, they have bereavement support groups. If you go online, there's so many resources for online bereavement groups. You can just look. There's some group meeting that can help you there. There are, you just have to want it. And it's got to fit you, and it's got to fit what you do. So I looked at all the shows, the 23 shows before me, and in a lot of ways I'm going to use that for my book, and I'm going to put more meat on that and write in a way that people will enjoy. My first show that I kicked off the show in February 2023, was with Reverend Michelle Whittington. And Michelle I met through Unity Spiritual Center. And Michelle was a widow for about the last 10, 15 years. She's a minister. Her husband was a businessman, and she lost him to heart disease. And she looked at life, and she realized she didn't want to be alone. And so she dated, she found different people, and was her journey to find the new me and who my new partner would be. But she gave a lot of great advice to widows as they grieved and of acceptance and moving forward. After Michelle spoke, the following segment was with a psychologist, a bereavement counsel, Edie Yoder, who I knew personally and who my late husband, John, knew. And it's about a psychologist talking to anybody who's in grief. Edie is married to an older man, and I know one day she will be a widow, but she has all the tools professionally to handle that when it happens. She talked about grief, about rebirth, and then we do the nuts and bolts of bereavement. We talk about estate planning, about your attorney. We talk about the money aspects. So Michael Murphy, my estate attorney, came on board, and very practical issues regarding the trust, the estate, because when you're a widow, it hits you so hard, you've lost your husband, everything changes. And then you do the nuts and bolts of the estate tax, paying taxes, what do you do with your house, possessions, inheritance, on and on and on. And that's the point of a lot of pain and confusion. And I had widow friends and patients who've never written a check. And so their life changes dramatically. Who do you trust? There are companies that not companies, but there are people who scam you online, take advantage of widows. They tell you if you fill out a questionnaire, don't put you're widowed, because some people will go after you. It's people have to look out for you. It's like your children try to protect you. One of our first widows who came on my show was Nancy Pachuco, and that was back in 2023. And she embraced the role of going from we as a couple to me. And I love that phrase. And maybe I coined it, or maybe I heard it somewhere. I'm going to use it in my book. But if I can condense the journey of a widow, the widow's walk, it's this very simple phrase. It is the journey from we as a couple to me. And it's really about rebirth, because when you go through that walk, your widow's walk, you have to say, who's me? And for a lot of women who tell me they've always lived with somebody, they've lived in their parents' house, then they moved to college and lived in a dorm with other women, and then they got married. They've always lived in somebody's house. And for many of them, it's the first time they've been alone. The first time they've been in the house alone, nobody's there. When it comes to decision making, they have to decide. So that transition is very transformative. And this show hopefully has helped women to embrace that role, to become empowered with the me, because you moving on to be the best me you can be doesn't repudiate or deny the fact that you're married to that amazing God who's somewhere in heaven. In a lot of ways, you honor him because the things that he taught you, the things that you learned from him, the things that made you special to him, embrace those and take them with you. Those are your gifts that make you a better me because you were a we. You're part of that couple. So when my widow friend Nancy Pachuco came on board, she talked about how she changed. And I ask widows often, now that your husband's gone 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, how are you different? And they tell me they're more self-confident, they're stronger, they harden not their hearts, as they say in the Bible, harden not your hearts, but they're more forgiving, and they're more appreciative of relationships. They're more appreciative of relationships. And so the other thing that comes up is money. And that always comes up because they always say the inheritance, what you inherit. And I'm very fortunate. A lot of my widow friends inherit money. They're not poor widows, although 1 in 10 widows lives in poverty. My group of the widows of Scottsdale, which I need to pitch as a show, are very affluent. They're very well off. But what they look back about their journey is about the memories. It's not the stuff. And my late husband, John, would come to me in various dreams, and I have used mediums before. And one of the earliest messages I got from him through a medium up north, the Carefree Medium, is he is telling you he had a lot of stuff. He's telling you it's only stuff. Get rid of it. And he was so right, because the only thing you retain are your memories. It ain't stuff, it's memories. And I tell this to other widows because they try to keep some symbolism. One of the things I do when I meet widows is I look for the wedding ring. We look at our wedding rings. And we ask, how long did it take before you remove your wedding ring? Because that's your identity. For me, I removed my wedding band and my engagement ring that I wore on my finger about 2 years later. But then I replaced it with another ring on my middle finger that was a large-sized diamond, so that if any guy tried to hit on me, I would just show him the ring. So my girlfriends would laugh at that. Show him the big ring. So it was like keep away, because I was not interested in anybody. So we have different coping mechanisms we do with the new identity, right? You were his wife, you are his widow, but now you're available. And many widows say, no way, no way. And I was like that for many years. One of the shows we did was about losing your children, and that was a very heartfelt show. That's when we had Kleenex in the clinics because we had Kleenex in the studio because we couldn't help but cry over the stories. And it is painful to lose your spouse, but I cannot imagine how painful it is to lose your child. There is no word typically that we use for parents who lose their children. We have a widow and widower. So the Helping Parents Heal group has a term for these parents who have lost their child. And it gives them an incredible resilience. And they call these parents shining light. They're shining light parent, because your children are there and they're shining light on you. So Erica Clifford shared the story of how she lost her daughter, Savannah, with Elizabeth Boisson, who is the president of the Helping Parents Heal organization, who meet very regularly and have done incredible work for parents who've lost their children. Doesn't matter how many years it's been, because you're constantly reminded of that child. How old would they be now if they had lived, right? They're your little angels. The show after that, in July of 2023, I had planned to invite one of John's oldest friends to that show and his significant other. And his friend was a widower and his girlfriend was a widow. And they were going to be on my show until I got the call the day before that his friend had died. So he had joined John. So I reached out to his girlfriend, and it was just too much. She couldn't do the show because of the funeral. So I went on and just sort of recap about where I was with my grief and my mourning and life. And you go on with life, but what do you do, right? And so what kept me going was my work. And after John died, about 6 months later, we got COVID. Remember COVID? You know, when you had to wear the mask, you had to isolate, everything was remote. So it was the only time that after I had moved to a new place that I actually cooked. I stayed home. I didn't eat out every night. And I realized that in order to fully grieve, you cannot be distracted, because what I was doing is, with my traveling and meeting with different people and eating out, I was distracting myself. I was preventing and slowing down the inevitable, realizing that he's never coming home. He's never coming home. I did move, and I sold the house that we lived in because it was too painful to go home every night to that empty house. And they do tell widows, after you lose your husband, don't do any drastic changes, don't sell a house. I honestly could not wait a year. I waited 3 months, and I said, I need to move forward. And I moved to a place that I felt safe, I felt comfortable. And because I knew when I was in the last house, any moment now I was expecting to hear the garage door open and he would pull up into the driveway. And it wasn't going to happen. So I had to find my grief in a way and learn to accept that. I think during COVID, when we all shut everything down, I worked remote, which was a different avenue for me to take care of patients and focus on somebody outside myself. The book that really helped me the most was given to me the last time I was in Colorado when we sold our house up there. And I was on a flight. And so I always think as widows, you're meant to meet certain people. There's no accident. So I was on this flight from Aspen Airport to Minneapolis to visit my son, Jason. And I sat beside a woman who was a professor from one of the schools in Minnesota. And we were talking about being the dean. She was actually the dean of the school. And I said, isn't it challenging to be, with young people, because don't they think they know everything? Like I have a little pill that says I'm not young enough to know everything, because sometimes the youth tell you they think they know everything. And she said, it is a challenge, but one of the things she carries to help her and that she tells her students is this little blue book by Dave Rico. And it's called 5 True Things. It fits in my purse, and I kept it all those years, and I handed it out. But during COVID, I would read this book every day. And Dr. Dave Rico, and actually I interviewed him during COVID. He's at the Esalen Clinic near Santa Barbara, and he's the author of How to Be an Adult in Relationships. It's called 5 True Things, a little guide to embracing life's big challenges. And it's a picture of lemons and then has lemonades, right? So I love what he says, but he takes it from a religious but also spiritual viewpoint about how to deal with love, but also how to deal with life. And I quote these 5 true things so I don't forget them while I'm reading it. The number one true thing in life is everything changes and ends, without a doubt, right? Everything changes and ends. Second is things do not always go according to plan. I didn't plan my husband to die on me. Number 3, life is not always fair. Yes. Number 4, pain is part of life. We know that. And the 5th one is people are not loving and loyal all the time. So if you go through each of the 5 true things, according to what Dr. Rico says, if you accept each one, at the end of each one, instead of saying, Why me? You say, what's next? That will help. So I spent about 3 to 4 months by myself during COVID, just going through that, meditating and walking every day, wearing my mask in my neighborhood, and just praying and being quiet and being good to me. And the only contact really was working remote. So I think that really helps. And I've told many, many widows about that, about the 5 true things, because I think it helps to have your alone time to think and to process. Definitely prayer helps. I'm a person of faith, but I'm also very spiritual. I think that helps a lot to tap into that. Family is so important, your children, your grandchildren, to have that contact, but also the time to weep. And it's okay to weep. I tell people, you got to weep. You've got to acknowledge that. The spirit guides have been amazing. I'm a little bit unorthodox because I have friends who are psychics, astrologers, and mediums. I find ways to connect because I do believe there's an afterlife. There's a life beyond us. And in various dreams, one of the dreams, John, I believe, came to me in one dream right after he died when I was in the house previously. And in that dream, we're on our plane. And he's typically the pilot, but this time I was in the pilot seat. I'm sitting beside him, and we're at our airport, and we're taxiing. And in that dream, he looks at me, and isn't it appropriate? I have his picture here. In that dream, he looks at me and had the most beautiful blue eyes, and he says, remember, sweetheart, no matter what happens, keep flying the plane. And that means keep doing what you're doing. Don't bail, don't quit. Keep doing what you're doing, except for a quick pause. So we're going to take a quick 3-minute break. We'll come back on The Widow's Walk with Dr. Connie with my monologue for our last show. Stay tuned for more. Welcome back to Widow's Walk with Dr. Connie. This is our final show, but it may be our last show, but it's not the end because I'm working on a book and I want that hopefully get out in a year or two. I talked about Dr. Dave Rico. I love this book about 5 true things. And one of the things he says, and I write down notes, and one of the things he says about grief, he says, we grieve to let go, we let go to go on, we go on to be who we really are. So that's the thing I ask widows. Who are you? Who are you? Who do you want to be, right? It's a journey. It really is that you figure, what am I without my husband? Well, there was somebody before, but now that you're different, what are you meant to do with the rest of your life in the next 11 to 15 years? So one way I've been able to go on is my work. Medicine keeps me busy, keeps me engaged in lives with other people, gives me purpose, gets me on a schedule, keeps me going. And I find that if I can be of value to others, that's my service. I tell people, I work for God. The retirement benefits are great, right? And I always pray before I see my patients. I pray for God's guidance to show me, what do you need me to do? Let me carry out what the Lord's will is in that way, in a way that gives them meaning, but can help people alleviate suffering, diagnose disease early, see if I can intervene in some way to help others and benefit their lives. So what I do with the podcast, which I look forward to, it's like my happy time to do podcasts. Last year, I was able to organize with Canyon Ranch in Tucson a Widow's Wellness Retreat because they're very innovative. They have these great workshops down in Tucson. They also have workshops in the Berkshires and in the up in California near Yellowstone, near the mountains there in Yellowstone. But what I did in May of 2024, we organized, through the help with Canyon Ranch, the Widow's Wellness Weekend Retreat, and I was their speaker. I set up a format with it, and they were able to recruit 10 widows who attended this 3-day, 4-day retreat, and we got to know each other very well through group sessions, studying about the journey of widowhood, using the concepts of we to me, but they also have a wonderful bereavement team that work with people individually, but they also have exercise physiologists, so you work on your mind, body, and spirit. And I think when the widows got to share with each other in a very safe setting their own grief with other women who know what they're talking about, then you were able to fully grieve more and to hear from others. And I became a very close-knit group. So that was so successful that we are doing another retreat in April of this year, a few months, in Tucson at Canyon Ranch. April 24th to 27th, and they've named it the Paths to Healing for Widows. And I asked them to put widowers in there because I have several patients and friends who have lost their wives in the last year or two. And I think that would be a good way for them to find how to grieve in a healthy way, meet other men, but also meet other widows. And some of the widows are a little bit wary. They go, well, we don't want to be matched up. I said, it's not matchmaking game. You're going through your sessions. There'll be men there who are grieving because they're wives, but I think it helps to know their journey as well about the male influence, the female influence, about grief and sadness, and then moving on in life. It's not there as a dating service. It's there that you can process your grief and grow from that experience. So that's something I'm looking forward to. I'm looking forward to that. But I look back again as these incredible women have come into my life who've really helped with this journey. And Sandra Mackey is one of my dear friends. She's been on her show several times. Her husband, Mel, died about 6 years ago. He was older, but he was truly a soulmate. She took care of him. She was married over 32 years to Mel, and she has such a good heart. And after he died, she moved forward. She moved on a few months later, met somebody, they're together, and she experienced a lot of backlash from friends, people who don't know her as well, who were very judgmental. And I tell widows, and as I've studied widows who've moved on after their husbands died, I tell them that people just don't understand that we believe nobody replaces your husband. Nobody takes his place. But if it's meant to be and you're open to love, there could be successors that want to be with you and you want to be with them. It doesn't mean you're betraying your husband or cheating on your husband. It means you've moved forward. And I think anybody who loves you wants you to be happy. They don't want you to be alone and miserable. So we talked about that. Michelle Claire came on board. She's my medium. She talks about her work with bereavement and channeling spirit and some of the eye-opening messages from evidential mediums that the things that come through, there's no way they could have Googled that or made that up, that you really believe that's true. Dr. Charles Chip Finch, who runs a foundation about grieving parents, actually grieving children, because he has something called Camp Pause. I used to be on their board here in Scottsdale. Chip Finch is an ER doctor. And how do children act when they lose one of their parents? You know, what is that like? And he holds a camp in the mountains for them once a year at that time to help children grieve and find ways for comfort. Andy Ferguson, a brilliant financial advisor, talked about emotional and financial aspects of items left behind. What do you do with that stuff? What do you do with pictures? What do you do with things? What do you do with property? Then I had my former White House nurse, Deb Beatty Meraz, and her husband, Rick Meraz, talk about their relationship when your heart is big enough to love another. Debbie was a hospice nurse after she left the White House. She was my Air Force nurse, amazing nurse, married to her husband, Jeff. They had 2 daughters. Jeff died of cancer. And then Debbie did her thing and continued to be a nurse, as hospice nurse, and she met Rick through hospice. She was a hospice nurse who took care of his late wife. And then after Rick's wife died, he needed somebody to go with him to one of the support groups. And so he called Debbie to go with them, and they fell in love, and they were happily remarried. And they're just a delightful couple, and just a new life begins. Afterwards, I call them my elves. They help decorate my Christmas tree every year. Marilyn Blattner and Kathy Rogers, known them over 15 years. They are best friends, and they lost their husbands within a few months. Both husbands died of heart disease. And they don't plan to date anybody. They don't plan to, move in with anybody. They just want to continue their lives and, being with their family and their grandkids and being friends and moving on that way. Then we brought Nancy Pachuco back about emotional challenges, about still at times when you think life is good, a song comes up, you see an old friend, and you think of him. You think of those memories, and they still come back. Of course, you'll always have those memories. I invited Tom Scaglione to come on our show in March of last year about his journey as a widower. Tom is a dear friend. I've known him 25 years. His wife, Lisa, was like a sister to me. She was a force of nature, brilliant, beautiful woman inside and out. She died of pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 12 days. So Tom has elected not to partner up, as they say. He's busy with taking care of himself, being with his kids, his grandkids, being with his family and friends. Barbara Kaplan joined us. She is an incredible interior designer, and she was actually on our show last month because her first show with us was in April of last year. She talked about if you were going to redecorate your house, what is it that you want? And the question for widows as you go on without your husband in this life is, what do you want? Because I asked them, well, do you want to live there? What do you want? Well, he would want that. I said, no, he's not here. He says you have free reign. Whatever you want, what do you want? You could do a totally new design. Well, Barbara lost her husband September of last year, so she's a widow. She's busy with her work, with consulting, and she came on our show in January to talk about how she embraced the role of rebirth, of doing creative things now and not being afraid to smile at people when she sees them. She just opened up. It's her renaissance. Dr. Michelle Whittington returned again to our show last year about finding new people in her life. She travels, she does workshops for women. Bonnie Shimko came on the show, and she is the owner of the Arizona Care Management Company. It's a placement company that puts special people in your homes to take care of you. She says most people aren't prepared for end of life. So that's something you have to think about. You have to write about it, what you want done. They don't want to think about it. And she intervenes with a lot of these people to find somebody to help take care of them, works with the family. Sandra Mackey came on board for the third or fourth time to be with us about maintaining your connections, because when you lose your spouse, you'll find that you might lose half your friends. Because if you went out with couples, when your husband's not there, the couples were there primarily because they knew him. So when John had his birthday was this month, he would have been 69. I got a few texts from some of his old friends, but the rest of his friends, you don't hear from him, and that's okay. You just move on. He's not here to cement our friendship anymore. Linda Smith from Casa de Cristo here in town runs their bereavement group, and she is an amazing lady. She is probably the most positive person I've ever met. She was widowed many years, taking care of her adult sons who are now in business. And she's been very active in the widow community, just offering support through her church. Then Michelle Claire came on board because my medium, Michelle Claire's significant other, took his life about a year ago, and how she handled suicide and moved forward. Then my dearest friend, Georgia Bunn, who's in this picture. Georgia was on my House Calls show years ago talking about sculpting. But Georgia is incredible. I've known her 25 years, a dear, dear friend of mine. Lost her husband, Eric, 9 years ago. He died suddenly and navigated the whole thing about running her business, her family business, dealing with that and grief and then moving forward. And I got to witness that journey about Georgia looking for love. And she found somebody. And I really think there's no accident in that this person was heaven sent. It was Tommy in this picture with her. And I had the honor of doing their marriage ceremony last year on Georgia's birthday. That was a wonderful time. After Georgia, we had Barb Olson come on board, another professional widow who is adept at counseling, but also at peace. I think that's what I find about widows. Sandra Mackey came on board one last time to talk about embracing joy during the holidays, about the milestones that you go through, about the empty chair, about the empty stocking. They'll always be in your heart. You just got to believe that. They're always with you. And they want you to move on. It takes a while to understand that and to accept that and believe it's true. And our show before this one was Barb Kaplan returning about her journey as a widow. And she's navigating that beautifully. So the 2 years that I've spent, did I accomplish my goal? Well, in a lot of ways, the podcast was selfish in its own way because it was self-therapy. It was my way to share, because I think what we do in group, you share, and it validates and it honors your voice to share your story. And then when other people go, oh yeah, same here, then you go, oh, I'm not crazy. Others have experienced that too. So for me, it has been very healing to have this podcast, to share this, to bring together people who are going to same type of journey, different type of walk, but maybe definitely same type of journey. And my goal now is to write the book, as John would say, write the damn book, sweetheart, because I love doing that. I need to work on that. Now that I have the material, I need to put that in writing even more so. But I look at all around us, and if you choose joy, that is a great thing. And I think for widows, I tell them, choose love too. Choose love too. Because one of the things John told me in one of the sessions was, your heart is big enough to love another. And I said, no, I'm not ready yet. And perhaps I think I was ready a couple years ago. But one of the things that opened my mind to it recently was this amazing book written by two psychologists here in Scottsdale called Open to Love by Dr. Gloria Horsley and Dr. Frank Powers. And I just met them the other day. I'd actually known Dr. Frank Powers here in Scottsdale for the last 20 years. I used to send my patients to him. He's a very brilliant psychologist, wonderful guy, very wise. And I recently met Gloria Horsley through friends, and they told me about this book. I met them for lunch. Gloria is 85. She lost her husband of 60 years. She lost him a few years ago. She was a widow at 81. So all of her life, she was married to her husband and had 3 children, her 3 daughters and a son. Her son died in a motor vehicle accident when he was 17. And she met Frank online. They met through Silver Singles. And Frank had been married, divorced several times, and was just looking. And when he met Gloria, it was instant. And you can't lie. When you look at people in a relationship, you can watch them. And I love watching the two of them. He's 81, she's 85. And they were like 2 giddy little junior high kids, all snuggled up, and they would laugh with each other. And I think laughter says a lot. If you can laugh with somebody together, that is such a good sign. But they're just an amazing couple. So for the widows out there who think they're too old to do anything, too old, you're never too old to fall in love. My oldest widow who remarried in my practice was 87, and her husband was 90. And they got married during COVID and actually got married in Snowmass. John and I used to attend their church, and they're happy. You know, every day you have is a gift. So the journey continues. It's a walk, and the theme of this is keep walking. So if there is somebody for me, and I think there is, I will just keep doing what I do, maybe spend more time with that person, obviously. But I think what I learn in each relationship helps me be a better me. That if I can apply that to what I do in my life as a physician, as a mother, as a grandmother, as a friend, as a sister, as anybody, if I can be better in some way, that's a good thing. And my hope with this podcast is that it's something that people will listen years later and they'll go, oh my goodness, I forward that to a friend that really helped them. And I do get emails and texts from people who've listened to it. And they said, you know, I passed your podcast on to somebody, and when they heard that one session, they cried because it struck them. It struck them as something so meaningful, so moving. But one of the things that you look at, that we realize, is you can't escape death. That as a physician, I'm very aware of that. You know, it's the ticking clock. Today, when I went over to my dentist's office this morning, I had an emergency surgery I had to go through my dentist. I was filling out some paperwork at the specialist's office, and I had to put my birth, how old I was, age, and I wrote down 70. I had to pause. I go, my gosh, that's 70. But then I look at my friends who are 88 and 90, and they said, oh, we remember 70. That's fine, you know. And you really have to embrace age as really your opportunity, but as a gift. Every day you have is a gift. And that then comes in your spirituality, your faith. What is your faith? What do you believe about what's next? For people who like to plan, if this is your end point, what's afterwards, right? And my patients who do very well believe that when you exit this life, and I sign their death certificate, there's more. There is more. And heaven, they describe, according to my medium friends, is unbelievable. It's nobody wants to come back. Only one guy's come back, told us about it, right? Christ has come back. But everybody else, from the mediumship, they tell me it's unimaginable. It's beautiful. But until then, we're in this life. So my focus is, what do we do in this life? And so as widows, I think that it hits us home that when you lose somebody that close to you, I think in a lot of ways, it strikes our mortality. That if he can die, well, I could too. So how do I want to do the rest of my life? If he couldn't make it to my age, I have this gift now that I can do more with that. So I look at all my widow friends, and it's, the 2 years went by very quickly with this. And truly, as I did my schedule, I always look forward to the podcast for the month with which widow's coming in. And I always tell my widows in the studio that this is the fastest hour you'll ever experience. And they usually tell me, oh my gosh, this time woke up so quickly. One of the things I jot down is whenever I get messages from John, and this was something that I awoke in a dream about 2 years after he had passed. And in the dream, I heard it very loud and clear, and I had to write it down. It says, you live in your work. You live in your work. So I laugh at that because it's so true. I live in your work. And then something else I copy, because I write notes from other people, that when you get what you want, that's God's direction. When you don't get what you want, that's God's protection. So I look at all the things around me, the pictures of my widow gal pals, the pictures of Georgia and her life ahead, the pictures of John and how typical. That picture of the airplane, that was what he truly, he loved me, but he loved airplanes too, also, probably second. And all the books and the words and the messages, it really comes down to embracing life as long as we have it, but making it meaningful and purposeful. And so I want to thank you, the listeners, for tuning in each month, but also sharing this podcast for somebody who really could benefit from it. So with that, I wish you joy and I wish you love and peace. God bless you and thank you for listening to The Widow's Walk. I know this was our final show for Widow's Walk, but it's not the end of Dr. Connie. I will continue my work on House Calls, which is my usual show every month for the last 10 years. And throughout the year, I will invite widows occasionally to be on the show to talk about grief and moving forward. But also a lot of the things that we share on House Calls deal with health and wellness and emotional and spiritual growth and joy and laughter. And I think it could benefit you as well. So please, don't be sad. Even though Widow's Walk, this was the last show, tune to Dr. Connie on House Calls. And you'll hear more when we have visiting widows come on board, but also learn from other ways to grow that we can help you on House Calls. So thanks for tuning in.